Actually, that happens to me every day at work. When I answer the phone, like I want to answer with my old job, like you know.
So,
This is probably going to be all of us today, so I suppose we'll get started. I appreciate everybody coming out to the, I think it's the first Filling in the Spaces this year, is that right, for Alyssa? A couple of things. We are recording. We will be making this recording available after, thanks to the Sarahs and some other folks.
more about
Gotcha. We do have an official Twitter hashtag for this particular Filling in the Spaces, and depending on your propensity for innuendo, you won't want to spell it. Put the case in your way, but it is Fitz Excel, all one word. And of course, the SU Lissa official Twitter hashtag is SU Lissa. So, and I am Chad, and I'm here to talk to you about how to use Microsoft Excel to analyze library data using pivot tables specifically. So it's not so much about the data itself. I'd rather focus on the tool of a pivot table, what it is, what it can do, and how to use it to answer some questions we might have about some of the information we're getting. Okay? So the first thing we'll want to do, because we're all going to work from the same file, is if you visit the website chatondata.com, and if at any time you get hung up, have a question, something's not working right, just raise your hand, I'll get back to you. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a permalink for filling in the spaces for today. Should bring you to today's page. And toward the middle bottom of the screen, there's the Get the File Here link. What you do from this point is your choice. Once you click download, you can download the file. I'm going to open it with Excel, because that's our tool of choice. And all of the work I've done has been in Excel 2010, so we're going to roll the dice and see if 2013 is much different.
Archimedes distracted me. In the back.
What's that?
That image of Archimedes, fantastic.
He'll do that. In fact, he distracted many people with his bathtub antics. Archimedes. Does anybody not have a spreadsheet open or have any trouble opening the spreadsheet? See the spreadsheet?
I have a strange error message I've been seeing.
Okay.
But something, maybe it's just an installer or something. Alright. Sweet. Usually favorite.
Now, I am notorious for wanting to see a lot of information on the screen all at once, so this file has been zoomed out quite a bit. If you're unfamiliar with Excel, there's a zoom tool in the bottom right. You can see a percentage. Right now it's at 70. You can click the plus next to that 70, and it will zoom in for you. And I'm going to do that for the benefit of everybody on the screen. Okay. This information that we're looking at is actually a 2007 IMLS survey of public libraries all throughout the United States and its territories. Territories part comes into play a little bit. It has a lot of awesome information. There are a lot of columns here, but it is individual transactions in a survey format for every library that responded. Every library to which the survey was sent. So by itself, looking at it like this is very difficult to do anything with. So you get to something like this, and you really have no good way of looking at this with the human eye and figuring out what's going on. The first thing I'd like to point out, if everybody could press Control, hold the Control key and press Home. That should have taken you to cell A2. I call that going home. That's my thing. I like to, whenever I'm about to do something, I go home. I control home. It takes me back to the beginning so that I've got a good view of it. What we're also looking at is we're looking at a tabular view of the data set. And when I say tabular, I mean you've got column headings, and our data go one way, down. It's a single dimension. A one-dimensional view of the data doesn't do us a lot of good when there's many thousands of rows. What a pivot table can do for us is a pivot table can turn this one-dimensional view into a multi-dimensional view. Obviously, we're working on a two-dimensional plane for our surface, so we can only see 2 dimensions at a time. But what that gives us is it gives us the front of a box as the pivot table. The front of this box could have various things going up and down it. You could have the state. And in some cases, you could have, across the top, you could have an LSA size. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But as you can see, what we start to do is now we take the data points and we aggregate them at these cross-sections. Now, what's really interesting about a pivot table is the pivot table adds more dimensions to this. I can only draw 3 of those dimensions on the board because I'm not quite there with my physics yet. But it adds a 3rd dimension here to create a cube. You may or may not have heard of an OLAP cube. If you take any of the data science courses, you will. An OLAP cube tells us we have a state, we have a size, and we could also come over here and we could say a jurisdictional type. County library, K-12 library, that type of stuff, right? Okay? Still on the screen, I can only see in 2 dimensions. I'm only seeing this. But I can take my pivot table and I can pivot across any of these axes to move this around to get the summaries to look like good answers to my questions. Okay? So that's what a pivot table is. What a pivot table isn't is a reporting tool. It's a very good analytical tool. It's really good for building ad hoc analyses. It's good for getting the number that you need for a report, but it's not very presentable as a professional style report. But we don't need to worry about that now. We're just going to focus on how to use it and how to glean some answers from it. Creating a pivot table. Actually, real quick, any questions so far? Does that make any kind of sense at all?
What was the name of the cube again?
It's called an OLAP cube. And I'd be happy to go into that as another discussion, but it stands for Online Analytical Processing, as opposed to Online Transaction Processing, which is your run-of-the-mill databases that you use, cash register databases, things like that. OLAP is a database you create to analyze this stuff in a multi-dimensional format. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Creating a pivot table in Excel is very easy. We've gone home. Control home brings us home. When we go to create a pivot table, we need to make sure that a couple points are true. First, the pivot table requires that your data set be contiguous, top to bottom, left to right. So that means I cannot put spaces in between these columns and not include them in the pivot table. You can, but every column has to have a unique header. This is all simple enough, but it's important. Sometimes folks get into making pivot tables and they get an error message, and it's usually because they've had address on there 3 or 4 different times, and the pivot table is giving them trouble. And it just has to exist. The column header has to exist. It also is going to take a single cell as that column header. So sometimes you'll get an Excel spreadsheet where the column header says this is, and then there's like 3 rows that say this is my state, and that's not going to work. It needs to be concise. Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you said they have to have unique column headers. What if address is one of the other cells?
From a technical standpoint, it'll take it, I believe. I generally try to number them or prefix. If I have more than one address, I prefix the heading with what address am I talking about. One example of when that comes up is when you're dealing with customer information. You have a customer where you send the invoice to. That's your bill to customer. You have a customer where you ship the product to, and very often those are different addresses. But you may see them on the same sheet. So I would put bill to address and ship to address as my column. That's a good question. Same with city, states, any such column heading. Okay. I've gone through, and I have actually already normalized this sheet because I want to focus us on using pivot tables. But if you ever get hung up on that, just holler, and I can certainly help you out at any time. But once you've done that, once you've gone home, Control Home brings us back to the beginning of our data set. At the top of your screen, you'll see the Insert ribbon. Insert there. Go ahead and click that. And fairly self-explanatory, nice little inductive user interface. The far left says Pivot Table. You click that once, and I'll take you through this screen. Everybody should see this screen with some reasonable facsimile.
It says the command is currently disabled.
For protected view, I think.
Yes. Okay. So at the top of your screen in Excel, you may see a yellow ribbon that says Protected View, and then a button on that that says Enable Editing. If you see that Enable Editing, go ahead and click it. This is a that will work too.
That works.
Okay, so you're all set.
The enable editing works to mine.
You should be okay. That's a good point. So when you download an Excel file, Windows 7 in particular, and Office 2010 and 13 in our case, are putting it in protected mode because you just downloaded it from an untrusted network. So it gives you the option to enable that. I have a few that I have to catch up on. Yes. I was like, I should just take them right to the link because somebody's going to call me out on it. Okay, so we have click Insert Pivot Table. Does everybody except for Ann have this dialog on the screen that says Create Pivot Table at the top? Anybody not have that? Okay. Excel has done a lot of the work for us in this case. So because we have our contiguous data set with nice, neat column headings at the top, it automatically picks up the total range of the Excel, of the data. So it has selected that. But you could, using the Excel builder, or the formula builder, go grab the range. It gives you the option down below of choosing where the pivot table report should be placed. I am not a fan of having the pivot table on my data sheet. In fact, as a housekeeping step, I always keep a clean copy of my data sheet No reports or charts or any such things like that. So I always select new worksheet. I've never actually put it on. Yeah? Cool. Any questions on this? I'm really glossing over it because I literally never change anything on this. So I don't spend a whole lot of time on it. We'll talk about it. Okay. So when you click OK, you should get this rather nondescript looking empty box. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense by itself. Created a new worksheet, sheet 2 in my case. It might be the same for yours because we're working from the same file. And you'll see a couple bits of information that are important. Along the left, it gives us, this is actually our pivot table. It's not very useful at this point, but we'll change that. Taking up columns columns A, B, and C. This is where we're going to do our work. On the right, pivot table fields. You might recognize this list as the column headings from the data we saw before. Down below, this is where the rubber really meets the road. You have filters, which we'll touch a little bit on that. Rows, that's our y-axis here, or they run up our y-axis. Columns and values. Okay, columns are obviously going to go across the top, and values are where we're going to put like dollar figures and the number of librarians, and it's going to sum them according to these dimensions. So the first thing we want to do, first thing I'm going to have us do, is I'm going to add the state to our pivot table, because we're going to look at some metrics by state. Okay? 2 ways to do that. You'll see that there's a checkbox next to the word state. You can check that box. Alternatively, if you're more comfortable, you can click and drag that state down into rows. And that's what I'm going to do. Should actually give you the list of states. One thing that I would point out, you don't have to follow me on this, but I'm going to jump over to our data tab. You'll see that I have one listing for Alaska there at the top. When I come over here and I go home, I have several Alaskas. Okay? It's giving me a unique version of that in my row. Okay? It's still not very meaningful to us. It tells us how many states we have, which, if you're like 66% of the country, you may or may not know. But it doesn't really give us much information. So what I would like to do is I would like to understand how many registered borrowers there are in each state. Does anybody not have this or have any questions so far? Okay. So in my pivot table fields, I have several fields, but if I slowly scroll down, and you can follow me, I'm using the scroll bar that's at the bottom right of the pivot table fields list. And I'm scrolling down and I'm looking for the column that says registered borrowers. And it's a ways down, and this is way down there. There's a bunch of asset information, including licensed databases, ebooks, hours, visits, registered borrowers. Okay. Registered borrowers is here, and it is a number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag registered borrowers and drop it on the values box down below. Remember I mentioned that this also includes U.S. territories. They were sent the surveys. This is where we need to understand their data set. Whenever there wasn't a response to the survey, they used a -3.
Have a -1, is that
Yes,
different?
everybody should have a -1
Okay.
under, I believe, MP.
Okay.
There's also, if you look in, there are some others. So I led you here to get to the next cool thing. We don't want to see those extra columns. We're interested in the big 50 plus DC, right? So we're going to filter our row values to include only the 50 states. Fairly straightforward how to do that. Not very intuitive on the interface, but at the top of the state, you'll see a cell that says row labels. To the right of the word labels is a drop-down box. If you click that, you will get the sorting and filtering options. Okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to use this scroll bar and these check boxes, and we're going to uncheck 3 values. Uncheck GU. I'm sure that the folks of Guam need to be well served by their libraries, but in our data, we don't need them. So uncheck GU. Also uncheck MP. PR. And I'm scrolling and unchecking. And VI. Okay. So only what is checked will be included in my analysis. But right now we want the 50 states. And when you're done, go ahead and click OK. So you can filter just like that. There are other more interesting filters that we'll look at in a minute, but that's the easiest one to use when you've got a small population of data like we do. Anybody have any problems/questions?
I have a question about if you, in your original data sheet, are hiding columns,
They will be available to you.
they'll still...
Yes,
Okay.
that's a good point. It's going to take the whole range, and just because it's hidden from view, it still exists in the sheet, so it's going to be available. That's a good point.
And similarly, if you filter on your original data sheet,
Same thing. Rows and columns both. I consider hiding columns a filter on columns,
okay,
right?
yep.
So yes, they will be included. And we can go back and manipulate our original data sheet however we want, and this will still hold its form. Provided it holds to the rules, every column has a heading, and they're more or less unique. We'll get big reference error messages if you don't. Okay? That's very basic filter. Now, I'm kind of a stickler for my number formats. Jared, you might be too. You might be too, right? This will not stand. This 8-digit number with no decimals or commas or anything like that. So we're going to do some formatting. Now, you're probably familiar with Excel enough to say, well, I want to make that a comma separated number, so I'm going to highlight B and I'm going to change it. That doesn't hold. Problem is, when you do that, the next time you refresh the pivot table, it all goes away. All that formatting work that you did. Very simply, if you right-click in the cell, you have a couple different options. I'm going to go into number format, which is right here on top. Brings up format cells dialog. This is very similar to the one that you get if you click format on a regular cell. For numbers, my particular favorite is accounting. Does anybody not have this screen? And quite frankly, you can make this format whatever you want, but I'm going to go with accounting with no decimal places. So I take the spinner bar down 1, 2 for 0. And you see my sample at the top. Now, registered borrowers is in a dollar sign. So we'll take the symbol away. I click the drop down on symbol and I take none. Now I've got a nice, neat number in there, right? A little hard to see in the back, but feel free to have a look. Okay. Good time. Everybody with me? You'll notice I'm not taking you through every last little option and tweak and trick and all that stuff because I have made a long career out of using pivot tables to get my information, and I've never used 99% of what's available. So I don't find it very helpful in those cases, so I don't think you would either. So this is the number of registered borrowers per state according to the 2011 survey results in a fairly decent format. I will zoom in so you can kind of see. Is everybody seeing what I'm seeing? Any questions on that? Okay. So, which state has the most registered borrowers? Which state has the third most registered borrowers? Often when you're displaying data or when you're working with data, you want to understand where the biggest numbers are and where the smallest numbers are depending on the data set. So another thing I like to do is take a quick look at those types of metrics. To sort this data, I don't use the standard Excel sorting. That doesn't work for me. If I right-click, remember our right-click menu in the field, I'm right-clicking on the number over here, sum of registered borrowers. Okay, there's a sort option. Relatively intuitive. I want largest to smallest. Okay. So now that we've got a good picture of the data, let's talk about what we're looking at. You remember over on our data sheet, we had several rows, 9,000 and change to be exact, 9,316 rows of individual library responses to a series of questions. What this has done is it's taken all of those responses, and as you can see, it says sum of, it has totaled the registered borrowers where the state is that row. Okay? So we don't actually have a particular column here, but we've got a state and we've got our sum. Okay? So we're doing research, and questions like this come up. What is the state that has the highest revenue per registered borrower? Well, we need to get the revenue. So if I scroll in my fields up, this is actually going to be up a bit. We have tons of different income columns here. We can look at how much revenue are we getting from the federal government for a registered borrower. I'm just scrolling this up here. I'm looking for the field called total income. Okay? So you scroll to that. Once again, I'm going to click and drag to my values. Okay. Once again, we've got our number here. That's the sum of that field for the state. is also ugly. Once again, right-click on the number, any one of the numbers, number format. Accounting, or whatever number format you want. I take no decimal places. Even though it is dollars, I hate seeing $1,000 signs on there. I know it's dollars. I get rid of that. I say none. Anybody not see what I see or have any questions or both?
I have a comment thing.
Yes.
If you want to sort your pivot table fields A to Z, could you show us how to do that? Because if you're looking for like total income, there's a way to sort it, and that was helpful for a couple.
Yes. I've never done it, but yes, thank you. Yeah, if you take, there's some options here. When you expand that, and actually some of this is fairly new, when you expand, there's a cog. And anywhere in any Windows or Office program, when you see a cog, it means that, hey, there's some settings to change here. There are different ways to view it, and yes, sort A to Z. I'm going to actually do that. Thank you for that. Maybe you should be teaching the class, Sarah. Boom. Okay. So now my field list here is A to Z, and it makes it easier to find. Thank you. Okay. So any other questions, comments?
Just a really quick question. At least when I'm used to sorting the format, I'm used to having to like highlight a bunch of cells and click. Is it because of the pivot table that you only have to click one cell and all the ones?
Yes, because when it's a good point. When you do these operations like number format, sort A to Z, and all of that stuff, by working within this here, when I right-click to that number, the context of this menu is that entire column for that row level, which we'll see in a minute. Right? You can have different sort orders depending on the depth, and we'll go into that. But yes, that's a great point. When you do anything here, by right-clicking there, it affects this whole set. Okay, not just that one cell. Great point. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So our question is, what is our total income per registered borrower? So we have to add, we have to get a way to divide this out. That's going to be, I mean, the math behind that is total income divided by registered borrowers. That's easy, but how do we get it into a pivot table? We can't just put it over here because that's not part of the pivot table. The pivot table is this, and only that. Everything out here is just raw worksheet, and it will get overwritten when we do stuff. So how do we get that? So it takes us to okay. It takes us to what's now called the analyze ribbon. Something was called options before, for pivot tables. And incidentally, if you are working and you happen to click outside the pivot table, all of that happy stuff goes away. If that happens to you, click back inside the pivot table, and it all comes back. Okay. Very context-driven. Okay. So we're going to add a column here that's based on a formula. To do so, we click the Analyze ribbon at the top of our screen. And about just over halfway across, we have an option called Field Items and Sets. That is a drop-down when you click it. We want a calculated fields. Take that first option. Now this is an interesting kind of beast here. Let's demystify it a little bit. Over here we have fields, and they all have names. What you see here is what's called the field name. We're going to add to this list without adding to our raw data. Okay. So because we can't do division. Division isn't commutative, right, or transitive. You can't say how many registered borrowers, or what are the dollars per registered borrowers at this library, then at this library, then at this library. So you can't add percentages and get the total percent, right? So we have to do some division here. We have to give it a name. So overwrite field 1, call it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine revenue per borrower. And then I press tab, it gets me out of the field. I would avoid enter because of defaults and all that stuff. And then in the formula bar, this formula bar is very similar to the formula bar at the top of Excel. We're going to overwrite that 0 with equals, and unfortunately this is not sorted, but I'm scrolling the fields down to get the total revenue, or total income, and I double-clicked on the field. I double-clicked this listing and I put it in up there for me. In Excel, the divided by is the slash. Okay. And I'm going to scroll down to registered borrowers. And I double click. You could also, if you knew the names of your fields, you could type that. Okay. Is everybody check? Okay. When your screen looks like mine, if you can see it, I can't even see it from here. You click OK. Yeah. Okay.
Chad?
Yes.
You did the same thing and you highlighted the whole column, and you did analyze field items and sets, and then insert calculate, but it also produced this other neighboring column.
I'm sorry.
If you, instead of just clicking a single cell, if you did the whole column, if you highlight...
You can, because when you're doing that, it's not sensitive to where you are. It's anywhere. You can be anywhere in the pivot table and do that. That's a great point. Because you're adding this field to the whole table, not just to the cell. Okay? That's U.S. dollars revenue from all sources by registered borrower. Public libraries in the United States. That's annually. That's yeah. So that's a calculated field. So just to play that again, I want to see the total expenses, which is total expenses. If you've sorted your pivot table fields, scroll down to total expenses on the right. Which actually in our data set is called total operating expense, which includes all of the materials, all of the staff, which you can play with that type of stuff if you'd like, but I'm going to take total operating expense, click and drag from the field list to my values. Now I'm starting to bleed over here, so I'm going to scroll over. My operating expense there. I format the column, right-click in the cell, number format, accounting, this is my preference, accounting, none, okay. So what's the operating expense per borrower? So what I do is I'm in the pivot table, I click my Analyze ribbon, Fields, Item Sets, Calculated Field. You see it brought us back to this dialog. Everybody with me? Or am I going a little too fast on the review here? Okay. I'm going to call this expense per borrower.
How did you get the total operating expenses? Sorry. At least a month, right?
So you go,
It's just from there?
you just
That's
click on
okay,
and
cool.
drag.
I just wasn't sure if
down
that
the
was
dots.
a
Nope,
formula.
nope, nope,
All
that's how
right.
you do it. You grab it from here, drag it down. Format it how you like, or leave it, whatever you want to do. Analyze, fields, item sets, add field. Our formula for this is equals, find the total operating expense. Double click. Divided by registered borrowers, which is down a little ways here. And OK. So that's the majority for as far as values go. That's the majority of what you see in the day-to-day basis. Is you see, I have something I need to group by, and I need something I need to total, and then I need to do some sort of math based on it. Okay, but this still isn't very compelling. How does this impact us? Let's go back. If you scroll either with the arrow key or with your mouse back to column A, you see our list of states here. Okay? That's not very interesting to me. What I would like to see is the next subdivision down from state is county, or in some states parish. But in our data it's called county. So we're going to add something to the rows box. I'm going to scroll to the county. And I'm going to take county, I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to drag it down below state in the rows box. Okay, so my county is here. I click and drag it down here. Here to here. Now what it should have done was given you all of the alphabetical listing of counties in the state that we're in. This goes back to your point, Jared. We had sorted by the number of, in descending order by the number of registered borrowers, but this level is not sorted that way. So I want this one to be sorted the same way. So what I do, actually I should probably explain what this is before we go there. So we have a state here, but we've actually added another dimension. So we've got state, which is a large part of this dimension, and within it are several counties. Okay? And the sum happens, and there's a multi-level summary going on. When you look at the row 4, CA, you look across. Registered borrowers is 22,531,000. That's the total for California. Immediately below that is a number, 1,068,754. That's the total for Alameda County in California. Okay? That's how you read that. You read that as here, this level is aggregated at this over this. Okay? So if I right-click on the sum of registered borrowers, and I sort largest to smallest, so Los Angeles County, California, is the highest number of registered borrowers in the state with the highest number of registered borrowers. That might not be the most registered borrowers by county, but at this level, that's what we have. We're only interested in New York and specifically Onondaga County at this point. So, what I want to do, I have to leave the county here, but I only want to see the states for right now. Okay. This is a handy way to do it. If you right-click on California, I'm going to right-click right here on the CA. And about halfway down the screen is expand or collapse. When you hover over that, a couple of different options there. I'm going to collapse the entire field. And it's going to take away all my counties. Everybody good? Took away all my counties, but they're still there. If you'll notice, next to California, next to Texas, Florida, New York, plus signs. Those plus signs, if you click them, will expand that level, and only that value, the level at that value. So we want to see New York. So if you click the plus next to New York, which on my sheet is row 7 because of how I sorted. So now I've got all of the states, but I'm only looking at the counties for New York. Okay? Row 16 for me, Onondaga County, at 256,453 registered borrowers. And I bring in 112, which seems to be beating the average $112 per registered borrower. Okay? Okay, I've kind of cheated on the spreadsheet. I gave us a VLOOKUP. I'm not going to go into that today, but we can talk about that some other time. But in the data are also different locales. So in our data, it tells us rural. Is it far rural? Is it close rural? You know, urban. Is it a big city, medium, small city, suburban? And that's under locale description. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this second dimension. But before we do that, I'm going to clean up my values. I only want to look at registered borrowers. Okay? So I'm going to pull all of these off. And to do that, from the values list down below, and this is resizable, so if you need to, you can hover over the side and drag it over. What you do is you simply click on the value list that you want to do something to which you want to do something, and drag it. I like to drag it right out here. You'll see a black X. I dragged it out to the side. There's a black X under it. That means it's going away. I clicked on and dragged total income. I'm pulling it out and get rid of it. Boom. I let go. It's gone. It's still in my field list. I can get it back if I need to, but it's out of my pivot table. Expenses per borrower down at the bottom. Click, drag, get rid of it. It's gone. Total operating expense. Boom. Gone. Take the revenue per borrower. Boom. Gone. Okay. Everybody see what I did there? Click, drag. It's gone. So now we're back to just registered borrowers. All those calculated fields that we did, they're still there. We can get them back. We don't have to go through all that stuff again. They're in the field list. We just don't want to see them right now. Is that you?
That was my question.
Okay, yep. They still exist. So what we're going to look for in our field list, scroll until you find a field called locale description. There's my locale description. Find yours. Now you're going to click and you're going to drag that on and drop it on the columns box. Okay? I clicked. I drop it on the columns box. Boom. So now we're looking at some multidimensional stuff. We've taken our state and county and summarized it, cross-tabulated it with a locale description. So if I scroll back down to Onondaga, I'm going to resize my pivot table field list here just as much as I can. And I don't want to scroll too much because I'd like you to be able to see, but just so for everybody's edification, city large, I believe, is greater than 750,000. City medium is 250 to 500. No, this is greater than 500, 250 to 500, less than 250, and then it's different populations like that as well. So, but one thing that's cool to me anyway is these are data points in our data sheet. If I go back, you don't have to follow me, but if I go back to our data sheet, PUPLD, da-da-da-da-da, and I scroll, I'm going to cheat. There you go. They're all data points right here. Okay? So we've turned data into metadata. We've turned data into columns, into schema, right? And much in the same way we did with the state, but that seems a little more obvious. But if I go back to my sheet, now I can see that it's taken any instance where all of these things pair up as something. And incidentally, I don't think this is any surprise that you get more registered borrowers per. As the city size gets bigger, it's kind of common. But there's a cool stat in here that we can look at. I'm going to scroll my pivot table field. If you sort it, it's going to be near the top. If you didn't, it would be somewhere toward the middle. It's called ALA IMLS librarians. These are master's degree holding librarians employed by public libraries in these jurisdictions. So let's see how many there are. If you click and drag that down to the values and drop it, you're probably seeing why I don't like this to be reported, used for reporting. It's ugly. Right? You can fake it, but it's still... Let's get rid of registered borrowers. If I take, once again, my values list has sum of registered borrowers, click and drag. Off to the side, turns into a black X. Boom, it's gone. Probably wondering what the decimals are. Part-timers. Part-time librarians are listed as, if they're only there 10 hours a week, that's 0.25. If they're there 20, it's 0.5, right? Okay. But we lost our sort order. It went back to alphabetic by state because we lost the field on which we sorted. It still exists in our data set, but it's not in our pivot table. You'll notice now you've got Alaska at the top again. So let's expand Alaska. Click the plus. And again, this is where we start to get into trouble with our data set. I'm looking at Nome, Alaska, and the rural remote areas. I have -6. That means I've got 2 non-responses. So inexplicably, they picked -3 and put it in there. But we get the point. We're using the tool. Alaska, if you scroll to the side, as you scroll all the way over, you get a grand total. So Alaska employs, is that 5? 50.95 master's degree holding, ALA certified librarians in those particular counties. Any questions? Anybody want me to redo anything? Yes?
Should that 50 subtract out the negative?
If the negatives are in there, I say 50, I wouldn't actually put that on a report. I would go get rid of those negatives first, but for the purposes of our math, it adds up. But you're right, yeah, the -6 is in there, there's probably other negatives in there as well. Yeah, good point.
What would you advise putting for like a global constant? If you, like unknown into something, or a 0 or a slash?
I would, it depends. Obviously, that's such a cop-out answer, but for a situation like number of librarians, I would actually put a 0 and assume, in this case, assume none. In a lot of cases, when stuff like that happens, you really have to go back to who gave you the data and say, what is a good assumption for these things? And because sometimes a lot of data are missing. Unfortunately, the pivot table is not going to show you what's missing. It's only going to show you what you have. But in this case, I would leave it as a 0. Alternatively, I would actually delete the whole row. Delete the whole row out of my data set, and it's gone.
Isn't it?
Yep, because when you're doing averages and you're doing average number of librarians per county, which, watch this, you do averages, right-click, and summarize values by. You don't want those bad ones in there with a default that's going to screw up your average. Okay. Other cases, another reason to not use a no response or not added is because you're doing math on this entire column and it can't add letters. Right? It's not that good at algebra yet. So what you could do is you could have another field in your data set called no response, and you can include that in your row over here. Which if I spent more time preparing, I probably would have done something like that. But yeah, you could put a no response over here, filter out all the no responses, and then all the math holds up without worrying about defaults.
And the pivot table would be able to recognize those, even though usually it doesn't show up.
You would have to actually have another column way over here that said response, Y or N, all the way down. You could do some rules based on it and say, if it equals -3, set it to Y. If it doesn't, it's kind of out of our scope, but you copy it all the way down, and then you use that in your pivot table and filter off of that. Right? That gets it out of the math.
But you would have to do that for each column that there was a response
Yes.
to that, so it wouldn't just be like did respond.
Yep, you would. And there are tricks to using that where if you're looking only at one of those fields at a time, like maybe they didn't respond to the number of librarians they have, but they did give you their operating expenses, which usually roll around. Then as long as you're only looking at one of those, you can change the column criteria to say if this is -3.
Your pivot table would pull off that, so as soon as you change it,
You have to go change your formula and yeah. So there's a lot of sanitation you have to do with the data ahead of time. I did most of it by adding a locale description as a lookup. You feel free to look in there and see what I did. It's a gray column on the data sheet. Created it from, I had to go to the site, grab the descriptions of all the field headers because they were these horrible, ugly, old school database field names that don't make any sense and translate. So you get like total income as opposed to .inc_O or whatever it is, So you kind of have to do a lot of that ahead of time, thinking about what's important to your data. Right? Great points. Anything else? Don't really have much more, but I do want to show you. We've been looking at sums. This is the sum of ALA MLS librarians. But we brought up a good point about averages. Now, we know that there's some bad data in here, so our averages are going to be kind of wonky. But to do it, when you right-click in a field, now keep in mind also, there's a lot of information going vertical and horizontal here. This is all one field. Okay? We're still on one field here. The values, the sum of ALA, IMLS. So you right-click anywhere in here, and you're affecting that field. Okay? If I choose summarize values by, I get several different options there. Now, excuse me, there aren't very many good options when it comes to this, so when you start to get into things like mean, median, mode, you want to do a normal distribution, which I do know how to do in Excel, and it's not fun, but you can do it, but not with a pivot table. You have to use more esoteric formulas and things like that. But, you know, for what we're doing, I want to summarize the values by the averages. And okay. It didn't change much, but the reason for that is because there's only one data point in Anchorage County's result set, and there's only one data point in large cities in Alaska. So the average of 1 is 1, right? So let's get rid, first of all, let's get rid of the county. But I'm going to leave it on the sheet. I just want to collapse it. So if I right-click on Alaska, expand collapse, collapse entire field. That's a pretty awesome number there. Change the number format. Maybe I'll leave it at 1 decimal because it's average. We'll live with that. Right-click anywhere, any of these numbers. It's all the same thing. Number format. I'm going to put it at accounting, 1 decimal, and none. The difference, just so everybody knows, the difference between accounting with no decimals or accounting with any number of decimals and any other number is accounting gives me a little pad to the right of it. It actually pads the right-hand side of the cell so I can have 2 numbers right next to each other and they don't bump right into each other. So that's why I like it. Okay. So this is by state, by locale description, the average number of ALA MLS librarians employed in 2011. May be interesting at some point. What you can also do, one thing I mentioned, I scrolled all the way to the right, kind of ad hoc here, and I saw a grand total. So there's the average for the whole row. And conversely, if I go to the bottom and down, I go all the way to the bottom and I have a grand total. These are the averages by those buckets. That's the bottom of our cube here. The average of, and it's smart enough to know how to do averages at the different levels. To say, you know, don't just give me the average of all these numbers. Give me the total of each, and give me the true average, right? That's one good thing about averages. Although I won't get into average as a central tendency metric.
I have a question.
Yes.
So what if you say wanted to see that whole grand total thing, or like whatever the last column is, the grand total, but you want that to become B? Is there a way to move that, or no?
I've never done it, but let's try it.
Okay. So we can get like bigger picture right away.
Yeah.
Just curious.
I'll show you one thing that I do know works. You have city large. You'll notice this is all alphabetical up here. But not grand total. Grand total is a special case. But watch what you can do in a normal case, and then we'll see if it works with grand total. Okay? I want to go from, I want to take a look at cities versus suburbs. Okay? I've got 2 options. I can leave rural in there and just move it around, or I can filter it out. I'm going to move suburban in there. If you scroll until you see suburb large, and you click its title, it should be like that. When you hover over the border that it created, you get like sort of a compass road, right? Like a four-way arrow. When you click and drag that to the left and right, you'll see a large bar. When I'm doing that, I'm actually reshuffling the deck. I'm moving that suburb to the left. So, let's see if that same logic holds true on our grand total. I scroll over, take grand total. Cannot move. But if these weren't all that meaningful to you, get rid of the column. Click and drag it out of there. I've been using pivot tables to analyze data dumps probably 13 years now. What we just did in the last hour and a half encompasses just about all. They've built so many features in that they get like a bad rap for being complicated, and I don't know what to do with them. So a couple very simple things, and you can really do some good stuff. Let's see. Incidentally, I'm going to do an experiment. You can follow along if you'd like. If not, that's okay. I'm going to get rid of average of ALA librarians. So now I'm back to just state. I'm going to get rid of locale description. Remember, click and drag out to the space where I get the black X. Now we're back down to the state. I'm going to find out doing the total staff. Total staff, putting that down, scrolling down to New York. I'm going to grab the city as well. I'm adding another layer. I've got city here. I want city to be underneath county. So, I take that and I drag it down. Okay? I'm kind of demoing at this point. If you want me to slow down or recap it, I can. But what I do is I drag city from my field list down to my rows. The value I've chosen is total of staff. I'm going to collapse my county, collapse entire field. Sorted alphabetically, I find Onondaga. I expand it. And within our community, this is where you can go find all the librarians. So to get what I have, you should have nothing in your filters or columns, sum of total staff in your values, state, county, city in your rows. And I don't really do this often, but if you wanted to, you could reorder these. It doesn't make sense with what we've picked, but you can drag these up and down and change the grouping levels. But let's see, Syracuse, 135.08 people employed in public libraries in our city. Incidentally, staff expense is also on here, but you can't look at that and think that's your salary, because that's what's called a loaded expense, which has all your benefits and comp insurance and all that happy stuff in it too. But it does tell you, give you some sort of measure of what you spend. So now we went through some pretty directed examples that may or may not have a real-world implication, but the point is now you're doing what's called discovery. Now you're taking the data and you're pivoting it across these axes and looking at different summations, different metrics, different math, to try to glean some sort of hypothesis on it. I will say that, you know, libraries in rural Kansas or registered borrowers in rural Kansas are underserved by their libraries because of, and you want some data to back you up. Right? So you, in that case, you would find Kansas on your state list. You would find the locale description of rural. You could use all three if you wanted to. You would take the number of libraries, number of registered borrowers, number of librarians, and then compare it against other national averages. You have it all right here. You don't print this. This isn't part of your report. You take these numbers and type them in. You've got the data to back you up. You've got a source you can cite because you pulled it from the IMLS website, which I'm really glad I grabbed this 2 weeks ago because it's no longer available while the government shut down. So maybe it is. I didn't try. So. Okay. And it's really just about, all you're doing is you're moving stuff within here, and you're getting different views of it.
What's the best way to sort of summarize, or get like a feel for your data?
Right. So what I like to do is I'll get another tab going. I'll get another tab going that says, you know, something like libraries. Oops. It would help if I could spell libraries. Okay, and then I would find the number in my pivot table. Or what's the number we have? Staff, right? Staff, employee. I would come over here and I would say, okay, let's say we're looking at Syracuse. I would say 135.08, and I'll round it up. We're doing government work, so 136, right? And I would say Syracuse. Then I would say, you know, rest of 50 states plus DC. Expand that a little bit, and I'll go down and I'll say, I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste, but I'm going to paste values. Anybody ever use paste values? Right-click the cell, hit values. It gives you the value, it doesn't give you the bold and the blue and all that stuff. Paste values. Format it how I want. But I got to do minus the 136. But you, so this is what I do. I take the numbers that I'm given and I start to build these things over here. Staff employed, and I might put number of libraries, and I might say, so number of libraries, or central libraries, right? And or some such metric, you know, say central libraries 8996. Oops. Go back and find our Syracuse and say 3. Get ahead of myself. Never demo that which you've never done. Now I'll do some math. I'll say how many staff per library. So on the whole, City of Syracuse in New York employs 45 people per central library. It doesn't take into account bookmobiles and branch libraries and things like that, just central libraries. And that's also important when you're doing this stuff. Be very clear about what that number is, because I've spent hours explaining a number that made sense in my head, but the title screwed everybody up. But the national average, according to just basic averages, including bad data, of course, is 15. So maybe it's a pretty good library community. Maybe we understand the value of it's a central, maybe we have more central libraries and not as many branch libraries in the city, right? Or larger central libraries. So, but now you're like, okay, so why the disparity? Now you can go and you can look at the spend. You can take the spend. How much are we spending on libraries? What's the revenue? What's the population base? And now you can start to do some really cool stuff. But when I go to present this, I'm going to take this and show that. I'm not going to show the picture. Okay. Anything else?
When you paste the values, is there a way, I know if there's a formula, it will do a reference error. So when you paste values, is there like paste special values?
It takes whatever the value was of the result of the formula you had, and it puts the result there and not the formula. If you were to just do a regular paste, it would take the formula and not the result, and it would recalculate based on its new references. Right? Once you get beyond this basic stuff too, you're into more interesting applications like R and MATLAB and MATLAB and things like that. But this will get you into some good summary statistics. Yeah, right-click values, I do that all the time. Another one that I like to do, this is off script, not that I have a script, but it's off script. I like to take and copy, and then if you go anywhere, go to PowerPoint, Word, wherever you're presenting, and if you right-click and oh, come on, man. Of course they took it away from me. Paste special. Picture. Okay. Wherever you happen to find it. I right-clicked and I did paste special and there's a picture option. Okay? Now it's actually a picture. Watch this. I'm going to make this blue or some such color. Highlight it. Copy. Right click. Paste special. Picture. Okay, so now you can use Excel to make it look like you want it to look. And then paste it into your reporting document, whatever that happens to be as an image. And it doesn't get all funny. Like when you paste into Word, you adopt the document's properties and headings and all that stuff. And then you lose the formatting, you lose it. It's all an image. You can resize this image. Okay. So you're not changing any data. That's all a picture. It's just a bitmap. That's all it is, right? So that's real extra credit.
You can't edit it though now.
You can't. But you don't want it. You're done. You're etching it into the pitch. You don't want to edit it. If you do need to edit it, you go back to your source, which you should anyway. Go back to your source and repaste it.
Would you put it in an email?
You put it in an email? Yep, I do that all the time too. I'll say, check this out, and then put an image in, and then they can't manipulate it. Photoshop it, but does anybody want me to go through any examples you've been thinking about, or do you want to try it? Okay. This is all public domain data. Have fun with it. Do it. You all know where to reach me. Everybody can reach me via Twitter at Data, or however. And you guys have been awesome. Thank you.
And if you want to see the video again, it's going to be posted everywhere. Google group and then the Facebook and the listserv. If that's cool, chat.
Yeah, I already signed the waiver.
Sign your list away.
That's right. And I am open to feedback about presentation style or content or anything like that. This is my first time before people who weren't forced to be here, so.
I think you did a great job of going at a good pace.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't get ahead of anybody or go too
It's
slow.
tough to teach with computers, I think, and so, like, bringing everyone along was helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Anything I could have done better? Did I speak up? I'm always told
Yeah,
that.
I was going to actually say that, because especially when you have this, and, you're referring backwards,
Sure.
right? And so, like, when you turn around, your voice is completely
Okay.
lost.
That one, the printer was going.
Yeah, not your fault.
I always lose the technology. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that.
You can always have a higher percentage of suit usage.
Not if they're going to heat this room if they do that.
Oh, suit.
It's at the IBMF open house today, and it's even hotter there than it's here. So. Okay, thanks again.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Is this like installation one of like maybe more Excel?
Yes, please.
You gotta do pivot. You gotta do pivot charts next.
I'll do charts, but I'll never do pivot charts, and I'll tell you why.
Really?
Because when you're doing pivot tables, you come up with these, well, what if this, what if this, what if this, and you get a chart built on it. Anything you do in a pivot table completely destroys your chart. So I always take my data out, like I did on that other sheet, and build a chart off
Build a
that.
chart off the data.
I'll take
Cool.
something out. And actually, if you want to, that right with face values, you can do that with the entire pivot table if you get something. It doesn't change, but you can lock in what you're.
Right.
So.
Cool.
Yeah, I definitely could use some more Excel fun times.
Like what kind of stuff?
I
suppose you
my
don't know how to
relationship,
know,
my
right?
relationship with Excel is very strange. I feel, and I feel like we're reintroducing some like, hey, Anna can use me.
Yes, I can do. Lookups maybe. That's a, what? Which one? Or like some key formulas.
The lookup tables?
Yeah, VLOOKUPs. I mean, we've got the room for another 30 minutes. So we had locale description in our example. And
Yeah.
actually, if you look at that's a really good example. The locale description is based on code that they gave us for the survey. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something like that. And then in the documentation for the survey, they explain what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are. So you see there's a sheet called lookups. There's tables in there. They're cross-references.
Yeah, I saw that.
And if you look, there's a formula field called that looks up whatever the value is in the survey to get the true description of it and put that in a cell. And that's helpful for their normal data sets. There's also other forms like SumIf. That's a cool one. Have you done that? SumIf, you can do your own pivot tables without having a pivot table. Nothing about it though. Maybe you'll have to review this.
Maybe I'll do it. Okay.